Hello, biologists. Today we're going to talk about invasive species. We're going to start with invasive species impacts. So, an invasive species is a non-native species that moves into a new habitat. When it moves into the new habitat, it will degrade the habitat in some way. Sometimes it takes over, like this picture of English ivy. Sometimes it clogs up waterways, like quagga mussel. But whatever it's going to do is going to degrade that habitat, and that's part of the problem. Not all non-native species are invasive. An invasive species has to be causing some kind of harm to a local ecosystem. About 40% of our endangered species are at risk in some part because of invasive species. So definitely habitat degradation is part of that. Also ecosystem disturbance. When a invasive species moves in, the number of native species and their density decreases. We also lose resources to invasive species, and we lose niches. We lose the availability of certain organisms to live in their perfect environment because it's overtaken by that invasive species. We also end up with monocultures. A monoculture is a population that is all the same. So mono being one and culture being growing. That would be like this forest here. That English ivy is taken over the understory, and it's now all English ivy, and it's all genetically really similar. When it's genetically really similar, that increases the risk of disease, but having all one type of plant or one type of animal can also increase fire hazard, and it decreases functional redundancy, which we know makes an ecosystem stronger, and species stability, which allows an ecosystem to bounce back after a disturbance. That is the resilience of an ecosystem that we've talked about previously. Invasive species are also detrimental to human health and safety. So we have invasive species that are toxins, we have invasive species that are pests in homes, in buildings, in yards, and we have loss of valuable crops. And not only valuable crops, but that means that we're unable to feed ourselves as we were before, and that's a concern for humanity. We also lose usable land, so we can no longer grow things after the invasive species has taken it over. And with all of that, there's economic consequences. So we think currently the damages of environmental species is more than 1.4 trillion annually, which is a huge amount. So how do we measure the impacts? How do we know 1.4 trillion? First, we have to figure out what kind of services an ecosystem supplies us. And then if that ecosystem is degraded or destroyed, what the cost of those services are that we've lost. So what are ecosystem services? We have lots of different ecosystem services. The first one is provisioning services. That means raw materials that humanity is going to use: food, fuel, fiber, cotton, lumber, medicines, water, all the really pivotal stuff for humanity for our life. That's provisioning services. We also have regulating surfaces, and regulating services is the ability of a habitat to sustain life. For example, climate moderation, the formation of soil, erosion control, which is what this image in the lecture is showing. A house is at risk of falling off this cliff. When it was built, the beach was much further out, but the land has eroded right up to the back of the house. We have carbon dioxide and oxygen regulation. We have water capture and purification. We have air purification. We have flood control, storm mitigation, and a key, because I love fungi, waste decomposition. All of those things are services that an ecosystem supplies us. We additionally have cultural services that enrich humanity's life. For example, beauty. That's what aesthetics means. This is a picture of the garden at Edgefield McMinimans, and we went for a field trip for the in-person class there. And it's just stunning. It makes you feel happy to look at it. Also, recreation, going outside, playing a sport, or going for a hike. Education, it's hugely important to get outside for education, which is why I've asked you to go outside for some of your labs this term. spiritual value, human mental health, human physical health. These are hugely important. It's really hard to put a cost on these, but we can and we do. We additionally have supporting systems of our ecosystems, and that is how they help keep everything net working together. We have primary productivity, which is the amount of sugars plants are making available for other organisms, including us. We have nutrient cycling, which we've talked about, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle. We have pollination, which is really key. Bees and all sorts of other organisms like ants and beetles and some mammals, really important for keeping plants going because they wouldn't have plant reproduction without them, and natural pest controls. So having a diverse ecosystem stops one organism from fully taking over, and invasive species allow that to occur. So it's all these synergistic effects going together. Now that we know what our ecosystem services are, we can talk about the ecosystem services valuation database. Say that 5 times fast. In this database, they are taking into account all of those ecosystem services, the different types of biodiversity in ecosystems, and then calculating their costs if we lose it. So in those costs, we're thinking about how much it would cost just to lose that ecosystem, but also the cost of maintaining it, the cost of restoring it, the cost of figuring out a suitable land management problem. Like all of those things cost money. And so this database is massive. And in this massive database, they have increased the amount that they think ecosystem services provide from 125 to 179 trillion annually. And we said the cost of invasive species at the beginning of this lecture. It was a large part of this valuation. So we are almost meeting the amount that we're risking with invasive species to the amount we actually have in the ecosystem. For reference, the global GDP, which is a measurement of our global production of money, like worth, in 2024 was 111.1 trillion. So the amount that we're at risk is like a huge amount. Here we have a diagram of a cascade of ecosystem services. There's a little bit going on I want to talk about. Here's our ecosystem. Here are the services provided to humanity, because we care about humanity in this. They're showing us water because that's a nice visual for us to think about. Then we can use those services like bringing water into our houses or to our agriculture. And then we benefit from having that water. Society, people, all of these different groups benefits. Now, the people that benefit also get to vote and think about how we should use those resources, but we're not the ones that are directly in control, so we are indirect managers. We hopefully get to restrict or support our direct managers, the people that actually make the decisions and put in laws and create, power plants and water filtration plants. Those are the direct managers. And the direct managers have access to affect the ecosystem, affect the services, and affect our usage. So it's this really interesting cycle where there's lots of different players. Now that we know what their estimate is, let's think about how they're figuring this out. The way that we figure out these ecosystem services valuations is with many different places of study. So here's the spatial distribution of study sites. Each of these study sites is calculating a cost and putting that cost into the ESVD for database. That's the database holding all these costs. What is the answer that they're getting with all of this data? It depends. So here is the number of value estimates by continent. So this is a value. Higher means that there's greater value. And then here are different continents. Here is the number of value estimates by biome. Check out marine, definitely the highest, followed by coastal systems. Why? Think about what might be beneficial to humanity in these two ecosystems. We talked about over harvesting and overfishing before, but lots of financial ties to the ocean. And we also can think about the value estimates by ecosystem um, service. There, my little face was covering the last word. So here, higher, we have opportunities for recreation and tourism, food. Isn't it fantastically interesting that this comes before food? Existence, bequest values, raw materials, climate regulation, air quality, all the way down to spiritual experience, which you might personally, I personally put more emphasis on, but by number of value of cost associated is the lowest, but still there. And I think that's important. So, what do we do now? We know that eco or invasive species are detrimental. We know that they're a problem. How do we get rid of them? We can educate ourselves to hopefully not continue to bring invasive species into new habitats. That's things like telling boaters to really check their boats to make sure that there's not quagga mussels on them, but also educating ourselves as people so that maybe we don't plant invasive English ivy in our backyard. Education is tied directly to prevention, so that's a big part of it. Once something is established, we got to get rid of it. So that's removal of organisms and disposing of them appropriately. In this picture, I have a group of students. We were out on Kelly Butte in Gresham, and we were removing invasive garlic mustard. Invasive garlic mustard is a problem because the seeds are viable for years and years and years and years. So once one is there, it can seed just dozens of others over a decade. It's wild. So we were removing this invasive garlic mustard and we were stuffing it into bags because you can't leave it to compost. If you leave it to compost, it'll shoot all of its seed there and then you'll just have more next year. So making sure that you're adequately disposing of it is important. Another option for getting rid of invasive species, because it's so hard to physically or chemically remove them, there are just so many of them and they grow so quickly, is biocontrols. So, biocontrols, also called biological controls, that is importing the enemy of your invasive species. There's some examples of this working really well, and there's some examples of this working really poorly. And so I have three examples, three case studies of when it goes poorly for you to read about on Blackboard. You're going to read about the cane toad, the mongoose, and the lady beetle. Each article is relatively short and really interesting, so please do read these examples. I think it's worthwhile for your time. When we're also thinking about invasive species, it's important to think about the overall reason that invasive species are moving around the world right now. And it's us. We are doing a global economy, we're doing global transport, we're shipping things from continent to continent. We are just moving things way more than we used to. And why are we moving things? We're moving things for goods. We're moving things for consumerist capitalist reasons. We're going to be making money with the things that we're moving. And so that brings in a whole new layer of complexity. And I have a video for you on Blackboard. It is a short documentary. It's 22 minutes. It's from 2007 originally, so it's older. I want you to compare what it's saying in 2007 to what might be happening now. And this documentary, the reason I'm showing it, even though it's older, is it's still valuable. And the person who made it, Annie Leonard, is the executive director of Greenpeace. She has been since 2014, so she didn't executive direct Greenpeace when she made this documentary. But it's tied to a website called The Story Of. So this is the story of stuff. There's also the story of plastic, the story of electronics, the story of cosmetics, but it's the story behind things and commerce. And I'm very curious to see what you think of it. I do personally feel like it shows it's biased, but that doesn't mean that the data is bad. The data is good. And the data that is laid out in this little documentary is old. So all of these numbers that you hear, they are greater now. They are more substantial now. The problem has gotten larger. It has not gotten smaller. So check it out. Let me know what you think. Email me anytime. And sometimes I feel a little bit bummed out when I talk about these ideas. And so I have a inspirational quote to end our lecture on. It's from Dr. Maya Angelou. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. So that's our goal in life, right? To learn and do better. I hope this was interesting. Email me anytime with questions, and we will talk soon. Bye.